Story 1. I want to start by saying I almost didn't pull over. That's the part that stays with me. That I was 30 seconds from just pushing through it, keeping my foot on the gas, getting home. If I'd done that, I would have seen nothing. I would have driven past whatever was happening on that road and gone to bed and woken up the next morning without knowing anything. I didn't know if that would have been better or worse, honestly. It was a Thursday night in October, late, almost midnight. I'd been at a friend's place, 2 towns over, for dinner that ran long, the way dinners do when you're not watching the clock and having a good time. And I was on the back road I always take coming home. It's a 2-lane country road that cuts through farmland and saves about 15 minutes compared to the highway. I'd driven it 100 times. I knew every turn. The rain had started about 10 minutes into the drive, light at first, the kind that barely warrants wipers. But by the time I was 15 minutes from home, it had become something else entirely. The kind of rain that makes driving feel theoretical. You're operating on trust that the road is where you think it is, because genuinely you cannot verify it through the windshield, and you really can't see a thing. My wipers were at full speed, and I almost did nothing. The highlights were catching the rain instead of the road and turning everything in front of me into a wall of white. But I decided to pull over. There was a wide gravel shoulder on the stretch of road, a spot where farm vehicles pulled off, and I eased into it and put the car in park and cut my high beams because they were making visibility worse, and sat there with my hazards going and waited for it to ease up a bit. I just did not want to keep driving in that much rain. I was on my phone, not looking at anything in particular, just waiting, when I glanced up through the windshield out of habit. And that's when I saw it. Or I thought I saw it. The rain was still coming down hard enough that everything beyond 20 feet was really just suggestion rather than an image. But the headlights reached far enough, and there was a break in the rain for just a second, and in that break, I saw something on the road ahead of me. It was a figure. On the road. Not on the shoulder, on the road itself. Walking in the same direction I was heading, maybe 50 or 60 feet ahead. I immediately sat up straighter. I stared at it. The figure was moving slowly, not struggling or stumbling, just deliberately slowly, the particular pace of someone who is focused on what they're doing, rather than where they're going. And behind them, trailing on the ground, was something they were pulling. It was large, and it looked like it was heavy at the bottom, from the way their body was angled forward against the weight of it. A bag of some kind, dark, thick, with a length and a shape that my brain processed, and then immediately tried to unprocess. The shape of it was just wrong. Not like an awkward duffel bag or an oversized sack. It was wrong in the way that I felt it in my chest before I articulated it in my head. It was long, and it had a contour to it, a silhouette visible even in the rain and the poor light, that had that particular irregular at the one end and even more irregular at the other end. The shape at the top was a shoulder. The middle to the bottom was a curve of a hip. It was the geometry of a human body, bagged and sealed, being dragged down a county road at midnight in a rainstorm. I sat completely still and watched the figure move. They hadn't seen my car. And if they did, they didn't react at all. They were moving with the same deliberate pace, the same forward lean, pulling that weight behind them through the rain. I had my headlights on, but not my high beams, and the rain was doing so much to obscure me, as if it were obscuring them too. My brain immediately ran through a list. A hunter, someone moving equipment at a strange hour, a tarp or a bag of mulch, or something completely explainable. Got to the end of the list, and I was still looking at the shape of that bag in my head. I picked up my phone to call 911 and registered for the first time that I had no signal. One of those dead zones that appear on rural roads without warning. Nothing. No bars at all. I looked at the figure that was stopped ahead. They were turned sideways now, just slightly. Enough that they were no longer fully facing away from me. Enough that I could see the profile of them in the headlights, in the rain, 50 feet away. And they were looking at my car. I don't know what they could have seen through the windshield from that distance in those conditions. And I don't know if they could see me at all, or just the shape of a pulled over vehicle with hazards going. My heart raced, and I sat completely still, the way you sit when you're not sure you've been seen or you're aware that moving might answer that question. For a long, long moment, nothing happened. The rain hammered my roof. The hazard lights clicked their rhythm, and the figure stood sideways on the road in the dark and looked at my car. Then they pulled back to the fence and to the direction they'd been heading. They took hold of whatever they were pulling and continued moving down the road. Same pace. The same deliberate lean, like they were moving something way too heavy, and the bag dragging behind them until the rain closed back in and they disappeared into the wilderness. I sat for another minute, possibly longer. Then I pulled out of the shoulder and drove forward slowly, watching the road ahead. Nothing. The road was empty. No figure, no bag, nothing on the surface that indicated anyone had been there. Though in that rain, on that road, anything could have washed clean in those minutes. I drove the next 15 minutes home with my hands so tight on the wheel and my eyes on the road ahead, and didn't pass another person or another car the entire way. I had signal again about 5 minutes from my house, and I called 911 from the car. I reported what I'd seen, gave the location as best I could mark it, and gave the description of the figure, the bag, the direction they'd been moving. The dispatcher was professional and took the information and said units would check the area. I never heard what they found. I called back twice over the following week and was told both times that the investigation was ongoing and they couldn't share details. A few weeks later, I was talking to someone who lived out that way, who'd mentioned there'd been some kind of police activity on that road the night of the storm. I didn't know what it was about. He said he'd seen lights and thought it was an accident. I didn't tell him what I'd saw. I still don't drive that road at night. Every time it rains hard enough to make the road disappear in front of me, I think about what's moving in the dark outside the range of the headlights. What I might be driving past, and what I might not know I'm seeing somewhere tucked far away, being dragged on the road. Story 2. The Tornado. I've lived in tornado country my entire life. You grow up there and you develop a relationship with severe weather that people from other places don't quite understand, not casual about it, not cavalier, not calibrated. You just know the sky. You know the difference between a watch and a warning and how important either one of those really is. You get used to the sound of the siren and you know what to do when you hear it. And you've known it since you were old enough to be taught. That's just how it goes here. I was home alone on a May evening when the warning came through. My phone went off first, the emergency alert tone that's designed to be impossible to sleep through, the one that hits you somewhere primal regardless of what you're doing. I was already on the couch watching the news, which had been running storm coverage for the past hour, and the anchor was mid-sentence when the lower third updated to warning in red. Rotation confirmed. My county, 12 miles southwest, moving northwest at 35 miles per hour. I did what I've done my entire life. Grabbed the emergency bag from the closet. Water, flashlight, phone charger, first aid, the things you keep ready in storm country. And I headed to the basement. Our basement was partially finished. The main room with a couch and a television, utility room at the back of the water heater, and furnace, a small bathroom. The safest spot in the utility room, away from the windows, interior walls on all sides. That's the place I always went to. And I've sheltered there many times before. I know the drill. Got to the basement and set up the way I always do. Utility room, door open, bag at my feet, weather radio going, my phone tracking the storm's path on the radar. The main room of the basement had a door at the top of the stairs that I'd pulled shut behind me. Standard thing, keeps the main floor draft contained and keeps the basement temperature regulated somewhat. The storm was close. I could hear the wind picking up outside, the particular sound that shifts from gusty to something more, with intention behind it and just with more consistency. The weather radio was giving updates every few minutes. The rotation was confirmed, tracking toward my neighborhood. No touchdown reported yet, but conditions were favorable. I sat in the utility room and watched my phone and listened. That's when I heard the front door moving. Not the wind hitting it. I know that sound, and I've heard it a dozen times, in a dozen storms, the way it rattles a door in its frame. But this was different. This was a specific sound of a door handle, the click of a latch, the particular creak of a door swinging inward on hinges that have honestly always needed oiling. This was my front door opening. I sat completely still and told myself it was the wind, that the pressure differential of a severe storm could create the impression of a door sound, that I was in a heightened state and interpreting things that had innocent explanations. But then I heard footsteps on the main floor above me. Not the house settling, not the wind, it was footsteps. The specific weight and rhythm of a person moving across my kitchen floor, which has a particular creak in the boards near the refrigerator that I've lived with for years and know as well as I know anything about that house. Someone was in my kitchen. I turned off my flashlight, sat in the dark of the utility room, did not move and did not breathe more than I had to, and thought about what I knew. The storm was still coming. Going back upstairs wasn't something I could do safely regardless of what was up there. I was in the most interior part of the basement, the safest place in my house. And my phone still had signal. I called 911 with the volume turned all the way down, my hand cupped around the speaker, and whispered that I was in my basement and someone had entered my home, and I could not come up because of the tornado warning, but I needed help as soon as it was safe for units to respond. The dispatcher was good. Calm, clear, told me to stay where I was, stay on the line, that they had my address and would respond the moment it was safe to do so. I stayed on the line. The footsteps moved through the kitchen, into the living room from the sound of it. It was slow, unhurried, the pace of someone who was not aware they were being listened to. And honestly, I couldn't tell if it was a pace that even cared if someone was listening. Then, that's when the basement door opened. The one I'd pulled shut at the top of the stairs when I came down. It opened. The sound of it was unmistakable. The specific drag of that door across the top of the frame. It's always been slightly warped, a sound I'd never once heard without being the one causing it. Someone opened the door at the top of my basement stairs. I pressed myself against the back of the utility wall and pulled the door shut most of the way, leaving a small gap that I could see through. The basement stairs were visible from that gap. The door at the top of them was open. The darkness of the main floor spilled down. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Old, that was the first impression, even in the dark. Even with the gap I was looking through, old and slow, one hand on the wall for steadiness, moving down the stairs with careful, deliberate action. It was an action of someone whose body requires negotiation. An older man, in my basement, coming down my stairs. He reached the bottom and stood in the main room of the basement. He wasn't looking toward the utility room, though. He was looking around the main room, getting his bearings, his head moving slowly. Then the weather radio updated, loud, automatic, the synthesized voice filling the basement without warning. Tornado on the ground, 1 mile west. Take cover immediately. The man's head turned quickly to the sound and toward the utility room. Pulled the utility room door closed and held the handle and stood in the complete dark, listening to the wind outside go from loud to something louder than I heard before. It was a pressure and wind that was soaring and filled everything. It made the house creak in a way it had never creaked. It went on for 90 seconds that I counted because it was the only thing I could think to do. Then it eased, gradually the way it comes, from the catastrophic to merely severe to bad weather, in a time frame that's disorienting because you can't believe something that large, like a tornado, just moves on so fast. I stayed in the utility room for another 5 minutes. Then I opened the door. The basement was empty. The door at the top of the stairs was open, the way he'd left it. I went up. The door was open, the way he'd entered. I stood in my living room with the weather radio still going, in the basement below me, and locked my front door. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the house and the property. Nobody found. Neighbors on both sides confirmed a man, older man, was wandering. They thought that maybe he was sick or had dementia, and whose family had been looking for him during the storm. He walked into my unlocked front door during a tornado morning. I spent 45 minutes in the dark utility room listening to footsteps above me, watching a figure come down my stairs, holding a door handle while a tornado went over my house. And knowing the explanation doesn't make the 45 minutes any shorter, no matter who he was. Doesn't make the door handle in my hand feel any less like the only thing between me and what I didn't know yet. Yes, he was an old man. Yes, maybe he had dementia, but I didn't know that in the dark. And you can never say how dangerous someone is. Story 3. The Blizzard. The forecast had called for 8 to 12 inches. I'd heard that before. Everyone in the Northeast has heard that before, honestly. And the experience had taught me that 8 to 12 usually meant 6, maybe 8. Manageable, the kind of storm you watch from the window with a hot drink and feel smug about having stayed home through. I was not prepared for what actually happened. By noon, it was clear that it wasn't 6 to 8. The snow was coming horizontally, which is a thing that sounds dramatic until you see it and then you understand that dramatic is exactly the right word for it. The wind was doing something that made the storm feel like a physical force rather than a weather event. Pushing against the house, finding gaps I didn't know existed, making the structure feel smaller and less certain that it had that morning. I currently live alone, a house I'd rented for 2 years on a road that gets plowed, but not always quickly, far enough from neighbors that a shouted conversation between us wasn't really an option. I'd done a grocery run 2 days before based on the original forecast, which meant I had food for 2 days and now appeared to be looking at significantly more than 2 days of being snowed in. The power went out at 3 p.m. Just completely went out. No flicker or no warning. One moment the lights were on and the furnace was running and the refrigerator was humming, and the next moment all of it was gone and the house made a specific kind of silence that you only experience when everything electrical stops at once. I had flashlights, candles, a gas stove that would still work without power. I wasn't without resources. I ran through the practical list in my head and determined I was manageable, if not comfortable, and set about doing the things you do in a power outage. Flashlights to accessible spots, candles lit, extra blankets from the closet, phone battery on saver mode. The temperature in the house started dropping within the hour. Slowly at first. It was the type of cold you notice around your feet and the tip of your nose, the extremities going first. By 6 p.m., I could see my breath inside my house. By 8, it was below 50 degrees inside by my best estimate. Enough that the cold had moved from discomfort to something I needed to actively manage. I moved to the interior bedroom, the one with the fewest exterior walls, and layered everything I had. It was doing reasonably well in terms of temperature, and had just started to relax. Or, I guess, just accepting the particular state that passes for relaxation in a stressful situation. But I was feeling less cold. But that's when I heard it. The back door. Not a knock, not the wind hitting it. The sound I described before. The mechanical sound of a handle. The give of a door with a latch releasing. The specific sound of a door being opened by a hand. I sat up in bed. The back door was the one that entered through the mudroom. I knew I had locked it that morning. I lock all my doors in the morning. It was a habit. Something I had done really in every place I live. But the lock on that door was old, and the door itself had a tendency to swell in cold weather, which I'd been meaning to have looked at, and I became aware sitting in that dark, cold bedroom that I didn't know, with with complete certainty what an old swollen lock did under sustained pressure and extreme cold. I started to hear movement in the mudroom. I picked up my phone and turned the flashlight off, sat in complete darkness. The wind outside was still going. The snow was still falling, filling the background. But under it, I could hear movement. Not the house, but movement, weight and direction and intention. Someone was most definitely in my mudroom. I moved off the bed without the flashlight, not wanting the light, feeling my way to the bedroom door and standing behind it. The mudroom opened into the kitchen. I could hear someone in the kitchen now. The floorboards there have a distinctive pattern of sounds I've learned in the 2 years I've lived here. I could track the movement across the kitchen toward the hallway, toward the bedroom. I did 3 things in quick succession. I called 911. I moved the dresser, a small one, not heavy enough, across the bedroom door as quietly as I could manage. And I picked up the only object in the bedroom with any weight to it, which was a metal flashlight about 14 inches long. The dispatcher answered, and I said in a whisper that someone had broken into my house, and I was in the bedroom, and I was snowed in, and I needed police. I gave them my address. She asked if I was somewhere I could secure myself. I said I'd moved a dresser in front of the door. She told me to stay there and stay on the line. The footsteps in the hallway stopped outside the bedroom door. I stood behind the dresser in the complete dark in a house with no power, in a massive blizzard, with my phone on the line and a flashlight in hand, and I just waited. My heart was racing. I didn't know what was going to happen. Then suddenly, the door handle moved. It moved slowly, the same calibrated slowness I'd encountered in other situations. The kind that means someone is trying not to announce themselves somewhere. The handle turned and the door pressed against the dresser and held. Silence. Then a voice, male, low, and what it said was not threatening in its content, but in its tone. The tone of someone who has assessed a situation and reached conscious conclusions that they aren't sharing. He said, "I know you're in here." I didn't answer. I told the dispatcher in the quietest voice I could manage what had just been said, and she told me units were on the way. Roads were difficult, but to stay in the line and stay where I was. He said, "I need to get warm." The thing about fear is that it doesn't turn off when the explanation sounds reasonable. My body was operating on what it knew, which was that a man had opened my back door and moved through the house and was now on the other side of a dresser pushed against a bedroom door. The rest could be sorted out later. I said loudly and clearly, "I'm on the phone with 911. The police are on the way." A long pause. Silence filled the room. I could hear my heart beating. Then the footsteps moved back down the hallway. I could hear them move through the kitchen, through the mud room, and then back to the back door. And I heard the back door open and close. I didn't move the dresser. I stayed exactly where I was for the 40 minutes it took for a county sheriff's vehicle to make it down my road. They found him a quarter mile down the road. His car was in a ditch, the way he'd said. He was a man in his 30s who had genuinely run off the road in the storm and been looking for warmth. He'd seen my house and found the door and come in out of desperation rather than intention. The deputy told me this in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee he'd brought in. And he told me this news He told me this news in the tone of someone delivering genuinely good news. And yes, I understood it was good news. I understood the explanation was real and the situation was resolved. But I thought about him on the other side of that door, saying, I know you're in there. The handle moving in the dark, the cold and the silence and the sound of a man deciding whether to push harder against something that was holding him out. I guess it was desperation, not malice. But standing behind the dresser in the dark, I don't know. And the difference between those two things doesn't change what those 40 minutes felt like. Not even a little bit. Story 4. The Storm Cellar. My grandmother's farmhouse had been in the family for 60 years when she left it to me. 60 years of the same land, the same structure, the same neighbors, a half mile in every direction. I spent summers there as a child, and I knew the property the way you know a place that shaped you. I don't need a map or anything like that. I just know it by heart. I know the slope of the land, the way the tree line is at dusk, the smell of the storm cellar doors when the weather turns. Not even a little bit. That cellar was a detail I'd always focused on as a kid. Old-fashioned, set into the ground about 40 feet back from the house. The kind with the angled double doors that lay flat and required a specific lift and pull to open. My grandmother used it for everything. Storm storage, canned goods, the darkness of an underground room that stays cool through summer. I moved into the house in June with the intention of renovating slowly, deciding later whether to stay or sell. I was 3 months in when the storm hit. I knew it was coming. The forecast had been clear for 2 days, a severe thunderstorm with conditions that might escalate, the kind of language that in every part of the country means you take it seriously, but don't necessarily panic. I'd checked the cellar earlier that week as part of the getting properly sorted, confirmed the canned goods my grandmother had left were still there, and replaced the old flashlight with a new one. And I also left a spare phone battery down there in a waterproof bag. The storm came in way faster than the forecast suggested. By 8, the lightning was the kind that doesn't come in discrete strikes, but rather a sustained illumination. The whole sky lit up for seconds at a time, and the thunder had the deep, concussive quality that you feel in your sternum rather than you just hear it. The rain was serious. I decided to wait it out in the house. The cellar was a resource, but not a necessity for a storm at this level. At 8:40, my phone issued an emergency alert, flash flood warning for my county. Separately, a severe thunderstorm warning upgraded, the language shifting to language I respected. I gathered what I needed, my go bag, my phone, the good flashlight, and went out the back door. The rain hit me like a wall. 40 feet to the cellar felt like 400. I crossed the yard with my head down, grabbed the cellar door handle, lifted it open, and descended the concrete steps, pulling the door closed above me. The cellar smelled exactly the way it always had. Earth and old wood and particular cool smell of the underground air. I got the flashlight going and settled on the wooded bench along the far wall that my grandmother had kept there for exactly this purpose. Then I heard something that had no business being in that cellar. I heard breathing. I've thought about the sound of it many times since, and I keep arriving at the same description. The breathing of someone asleep. Slow and regular and deep, the particular quality of unconscious, respiration. It was coming from the far corner of the cellar, behind the shelving unit where my grandmother kept the canned goods. I stayed completely still on the bench with the flashlight in my hand and pointed it at the shelving unit. The shelves were floor to ceiling, deep enough to cast significant shadow behind them, and from where I was sitting, the beam of the flashlight didn't fully penetrate the space behind them. But I was so scared to move any closer. I also knew I was in an enclosed underground space with one exit, which was directly above me, and that whatever was behind those shelves was between me and the far wall. I called out. I was trying to call out the way you do when you're trying to be innocent, really. But it was loud, clear, and no tremor, but I could barely manage that. I said, "Who's there?" The breathing changed. The rhythm of it shifted, broke, and then stopped. The particular cessation of someone going from sleep to wakefulness. There was silence for a moment. Then, from behind the shelves, there was movement. The sound of a person repositioning, the shuffle of feet on a concrete floor, the brush of clothing against the wood of the shelves. And then a man came around the edge of the shelving unit and stood in the beam of my flashlight. My heart started to race, and my stomach started to churn. He was not young, but not old either, maybe 45, dressed in clothing that had been through weather. He had the look of someone who had been somewhere for a while without intending to be. Disoriented, squinting against the flashlight, not fully awake. He looked at me the way that I was looking at him. The expression of someone encountering something they hadn't expected. A surprise, honestly. He said, "I didn't know anyone was here." I said, "This is private property." He said, "I know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come down here." He'd said it almost like he'd been here before. He'd come in through the cellar doors in the storm and settle in the back corner behind the shelves and fallen asleep there. He said he hadn't heard me come down in the rain and thunder. I asked him who he was. He gave me a name and I had no way to verify. He said he'd been walking between towns and he'd been caught in the storm and that he knew the cellar wasn't locked and he thought no one would be down here. He was right that it hadn't been locked. My grandmother never locked the cellar. She said once that she didn't see the point. There was nothing down there worth stealing, that locking things that didn't need locking was really a waste of time and a waste of lock. I was in a cellar with a man I'd never met underground in one exit during a severe storm. I said very clearly, "I need you to go to the far end of the cellar and stay there." He looked at me, and the flashlight in my hand that I was pointing away from his face. He nodded and went to the far end of the cellar and sat down on the floor and didn't say anything else. I called the county sheriff. Poor signal underground, but it was enough. Gave them the address, gave the situation, and was told someone would come when the storm allowed. We sat on opposite ends of that cellar for about an hour and 40 minutes. He against the far wall, me near the stairs. He answered questions I asked him in the slow, careful way you conduct a conversation when you're trying to learn something real about a person, but I guess not revealing any of your own uncertainty. He did seem to tell a consistent story, but he just had a look about him that I didn't trust. He didn't move from where I'd put him, though, so that was at least something. The storm eased up, and I heard it through the cellar door, the rain going from constant to intermittent, the thunder fall rolling further away. 2 deputies arrived 20 minutes later after the all clear. They took his name and information, confirmed a record that didn't include anything violent, and confirmed the story he told me was consistent to what they could verify. They told me he'd likely move on, suggested I put a lock on the cellar. I did the next morning. But here's the thing I sit with more than any other detail from that night. When I went back down to the cellar the following day to properly assess the space and figure out what kind of lock to buy, I found the corner behind the shelving unit again. There was an impression in the dirt floor where he'd been lying. The kind of impression that takes time. The dust displaced, the earth slightly compacted, the shape of a person clearly legible. It wasn't fresh at all. The impression wasn't from that night. It had the same look of something made over multiple occasions. It had depth to it, the way the dirt had settled around the edges, the dust gathered rather than disturbed. He had been in that cellar before that night, and I know it. He'd been in there before multiple times, long enough to leave a mark in the earth of the floor on my property, 40 feet from the back door of my house while I was inside. I decided to sell the house 8 months later, told myself it was the right financial decision, that I'd always been undecided about staying and the renovation costs were more than I'd planned for. All those things were definitely true. But I drive past it sometimes on my way to other places, and I look at the spot in the yard where the cellar door sit flat on the ground. And I think about what was down there, not just that night. All the nights I didn't know to listen for it. All the nights he was in there, right by my house.